Good afternoon, and welcome to Interact. Oh, that's quite loud, isn't it? If it's too loud, let me know. It sounds really loud to me. Lot of echo. Okay, welcome to Interactive Web Pages. There will be a link to these slides and sample codes at the end of the talk, so you don't have to think about it. So, my name is Coen de Groot. I'm a freelance Python developer and trainer. I started programming a long time ago. My first computer looked a bit like that. It just consisted of a circuit board and some components that I had to solder on. And then when I went to university, and that's when I started coding, so a long time ago. And then I got my first computer job when I was at uni. And I started doing some coding, doing some training, and I've been doing development and training ever since. And then I discovered Python over 20 years ago. It's still my favorite language. It fits my brain and it just works. Good. So, enough about me. Interactive web pages. So I wanted to start with a little example of something that I created for myself recently. So I wrote and recorded 5 Python training videos for a large publisher. Each video covers a lot of material in a short amount of time, includes example code, slides, and myself talking, voiceover. Now, I find when I'm reading from a script, I can read about one line. After one line, I start to stutter, or I start making mistakes. And removing those mistakes and ums and ahs, I find very tedious. So, being a Python programmer, instead of doing 5 minutes of tedious work, I spend a couple of weeks off writing an app for this. Yes, you do. I keep doing that. So, this lets me record myself speaking, listen back to myself, and then re-record or approve the recording, one line at a time. It also creates the slides, code images, runs the code, captures the output, and gathers it all into a video, because that was other work that I didn't want to do. So, here's the interactive part. Here's part of the voice-over recording page. Some of the interactions I wanted was, when I click the record button, it should start recording the audio, and replace the record button with a stop recording button. Then, when I click the stop recording button, I want to stop the recording, update the buttons, and show the list of recordings, so I can listen to it, approve it, or re-record it. I created the first version about 4 years ago with a simple front end using Flask. Can I have a show of hands? Who's using Flask? Who's a Flask programmer used in a couple of years? Okay, that's a fair few. And then after creating a Django course last year and needing some changes, I rewrote it in Django earlier this year. So another show of hands, Django developers? About the same. And then just to round it off, anybody using other frameworks? Fast API? Oh, that's also, yeah. In fact, I started with Zope, but that's a long time ago. I don't use it anymore. Okay. So, now, to create this, before I even started adding any interactions, of course I had to know Python, I needed to know some web framework, some HTML, some database knowledge, and ideally some way of making this look nice, CSS or CSS framework. But then, on top of that, to bring the pages to life, I needed a way to activate some of the elements, like a button. When I do something to an element on a page, I want something to happen on the back end and on the front end. Most of the work I want to be done in Python in the back end, because that's what I'm comfortable with. That's what I already know. And then as little as possible should be done on the front end, preferably without me having to write any JavaScript. I can write JavaScript. I have written JavaScript in the past, but I haven't really kept up with it. And switching between JavaScript and Python, that's just going to confuse me and lead to mistakes and all of that. So, the early web pages, 20 or 30 years ago, were static. Just pictures and text. That's about it. And maybe a form. You fill in a form, you submit the form, and you get a whole page back. Whatever you did, you always got a whole page back. Now, modern websites, they're more dynamic. You stay on a single page, things just happen. You added some information, it gets saved. You scroll down to the end of the page, you get more information. You get more, I was going to call them tweets, you get more access. You get more Facebook posts, more blog, whatever, more paragraphs, etc. That is usually done using JavaScript, sometimes based on a front-end framework like AngularJS or React. And then there are some ways now to run Python in the browser. And this is getting very exciting, but I don't think it's production ready yet. I don't think we can really create a normal public-facing website and using PyScript or one of the other technologies. I expect it might be another 5 years or so, but feel free to argue with me about that afterwards. And also, you then also need something that handles the interaction between the front end and the back end. Okay, then there's htmx, the topic for this talk. I first heard about htmx through the excellent Python Bytes podcast. Michael Kennedy, one of the co-hosts, got very excited about htmx, and as far as I know, he still is. So, htmx gives us, as Python developers, the interaction between the HTML on the front end and our Python code on the back end. It is written in JavaScript, but you can use htmx without writing any JavaScript yourself. It is declarative. You tell it what you want, and it is up to htmx to figure out how to do it. It uses special attributes on the HTML tags. For instance, maybe you put an attribute on a button to say that when the button is clicked, htmx will request some information from the server and show it on the page. Okay, so let me show you what it can do. Okay, so this is a website based on Django and htmx. It's running on my own computer at the moment. On GitHub, you will find a Django version and a Flask version. So I didn't do one for all the platforms. That was going to be a bit too much, but we got Django and Flask covered. But actually, there isn't much difference. It doesn't really matter which framework, web framework you use. And with one minor exception, I did not have to write any JavaScript code. So I'll show you some of the functionality, just so you can see what you can do with htmx. And then we'll look at the code that's behind it. Okay, so let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so it's a little database of dinosaurs that I found somewhere that I had a bit of fun with. It's nothing serious. So first of all, we got some locations. I can add a new location. So I'm looking down there because that's my monitor. That's my screen at the moment. I can add a new location, and it just gets added to the list. And I can delete it again. It asks for confirmation. Are you sure? Yes. Then here we've got a chart of dinosaurs by time, the number of types of dinosaurs by time. At the moment, it goes back to 228 million years. If I change that to, say, 150, and then you can't see me hitting the keyboard, but when I hit the tab key, it will tab off the field, and the graph will change. It's now got the new range. And I could do that again for, let's say, 100. And again, if I hit tab, the graph zooms in. Okay. So then we can work with dropdowns. Here's a list of all the dinosaurs. If I select a particular period, we'll go down from 309 to 20 dinosaurs in the period. We can handle multiple drop-downs. If I take an ornithosaurus, or whatever it is, can't read it from here. Okay. I can drill down through the tree of life, the way the dinosaurs are structured. And every time it will pick up a new one. It will drill down into this tree of dinosaurs. I can do a live search. So if I just type in a couple of characters, AA, it will show me all the dinosaurs where AA is in those details. Scrolling page. This is deliberately coming up in chunks of 10. Normally, of course, this would be much more fluent, but I've actually slowed it down. Now, if you look at the scroll bar, you can see there's a little bit more at the bottom. There's a few more examples. If I scroll down a bit further, then it will add the next 10. I've put in a bit of delay to really show you that it's kind of in progress. Okay, so endless scrolling list. Here's my list of favorite dinosaurs. At the moment, only whatever that's called. I can pick up other dinosaurs and I can move them over. And then when I move off, it will actually remember the list. So this will get saved. This automatically saves it for me. And then finally, I've got some tabs. I can switch between tabs, and every time I switch to a different tab, it will refresh the list of what it's showing, of the list of dinosaurs. Okay, so again, this is Django and a few tags. I did not have to write any JavaScript apart from for this page. I had to find a bit of JavaScript that was already written, that is actually listed on the htmx website that I just pretty much took as it was. Right, so that's what we can do with this thing, htmx. Oops, not that one. So let's go back to, okay. So let's have a look at the code. How does it work? How do we get started with Flask or Django? And what are the tags that make this work? So here's a bit of a page. When your page gets loaded, the HTML will request, I don't know if I can use my mouse here. Yeah, the HTML will request the htmx script. That's just a standard script. I didn't write that, I just downloaded it and set it up. So we're loading the htmx script, and then the script will look through all the elements on the page, and it will find the AJAX tags. So in this case, it sees that there's a particular dropdown, the early Jurassic dropdown, and it sees there's the AJAX get tag, which means something must happen when this dropdown changes. So it sets an event on the dropdown for us. Okay, the page is now ready for the user to do something with. So then when the user changes the dropdown, the event handler picks it up and sends a request to the server. The server receives the server's view code or router code, depending on your terminology, receives the request. And here's the trick, it creates some HTML. I mean, we're very used to creating HTML. That's what we do when you do a Django website all the time. It does not create some JSON string or something. Instead, it just creates pure HTML. So that's what we can see on the bottom right. There's some HTML that has been created. That is then sent back to the browser and received by htmx. So htmx receives the HTML chunk, and it finds the element, in this case identified with the hash dinosaur list, and it just replaces the HTML. So it takes the old list and replaces the new list. It's as simple as that. It's just up to us to make sure that we give it the right bit of HTML. Okay, so then on to the code. The first step is, of course, we need to link to the htmx script. You can either use a content delivery network or serve the script yourself. I like serving scripts myself. So in this case, I've taken the script from the htmx website and I've just put it in Django static JS static folder, JS subfolder. It's just a script. Okay, fairly straightforward. So let's have a look at some of the pages in the demo. So first, the single dropdown, the list of dinosaurs by period. So bottom right, you can see there's the dropdown. Just to remind you, when you select a different period, the list of dinosaurs need to be updated. And it also changed the title. You can't see that, but behind the dropdown it says 309 found, 20 found, or however many are in that period. Okay, so as you've already seen, AJAX get sets a trigger on the dropdown. When the dropdown value changes, a request is made to the specified URL. So in this case, in Django terms, that goes to an endpoint that I've called dinosaurs for period. So that's just Django will translate that into an actual URL for us. Now, htmx automatically includes the value of this element for us. So each of those periods has got an ID. So as often with the dropdown, we've got an ID and we've got a string. The htmx will send the period ID with the request. Don't have to do anything. We don't have to do that, just does it for us. So then the view function gets the period ID, it retrieves the right set of dinosaurs, and it turns into a chunk of HTML. That gets sent back, and that gets updated. So the second one in the box that I've highlighted, below AJAX get, we've got AJAX target. And the target is just a CSS selector, I think it's called. Basically, in this case, it says, find the element with the ID of dinosaur list. So if you look at the very bottom, almost at the bottom, you see there's a div with the dinosaur list, with ID of dinosaur list. When we first create this page, that will show all the dinosaurs. And then when htmx kicks in, it will replace just the dinosaur list. So that's the basis of htmx. If you followed it so far, you've got kind of the this is about as complicated as it gets. Okay, so if you're not following it, then this might be a good time to ask a question. Feel free. I'll see if I can answer that. If not, let's move on. Okay, so let's cover a few more. No questions, I think. Good. Okay, so let's cover a few more different codes. Now, the chart page has two input boxes. If you look at the bottom right, we've got the start value of the start range, the earliest date, and then the end date. So we got the start date and end date. When you change the end date, you also need to send the starting date. Because the script can't see, the script that generates the list needs to know the start and the end value. If it only knows one, it doesn't know what to do. So, by default, as I told you in the previous slide, by default, htmx includes the value of the element that has just changed. So we need to say, for the first input that's listed there, which is the starting one, we say, okay, also include the end value. And for the second input, we're saying, which is the end value, also include the start value. So you can specify other things to include as part of the information that is sent back to your backend. Then just to tidy things up a little bit, if you look at the input itself, the two inputs do not have a target. So they don't tell you what should be replaced. That is because the class above it, that specifies the target, and the two inputs that are children of the paragraph of the P, they will inherit the AJAX tags. So you can have a whole block, a whole div or whatever, and you specify one target or some other attribute that will apply to every element within that div. So here we've got 4 tabs on the right. I mean, in the HTML, they're actually list items styled to look like tabs, but they look like tabs to us. When you click on the tab, it should request a new list of dinosaurs. It's going to request a list of dinosaurs. It will also send the required. Oh yes, when it requests the right diet, it needs to send along which particular diet we're looking at. So it needs to say, okay, we want the carnivorous or herbivorous or omnivorous or other. But we don't have some sort of input element with a value here. So instead of that, we can use AJAX vals, and we just specify what the value of is or values are. So AJAX vals, we put in a fixed value. Now, in this case, I actually fill in the value when this HTML page is being generated. So it's variable, but it's variable on the back end. It's not variable on the front end. This looks a bit strange. If you look at the AJAX vals, it looks like we're building up a Python dictionary or something, but it's actually it's JSON string, or yes, it's a JavaScript object like a JSON string. So it's very similar to Python. It looks like a dictionary. Okay. So that's how you send along fixed values. Then the other thing that we haven't seen yet is when you click on one of the tabs, Two things change. The first one is the row of tabs is refreshed. A different tab now becomes active. If you look at the list item, I don't have a pointer, but if it's just under the first list item, say class equals is active, if it's an active diet, so we need an extra class there. I could have done this in JavaScript. I probably would have been able to do that, but actually, I'm a Python programmer. I prefer Python, so I'm using Python for this. So, when we click on one of the tabs, we need to send a new version of that row of tabs with the right tab highlighted. But we also want to see the list of dinosaurs. That also needs to be refreshed. So far, when we specify a AJAX target, we set the AJAX target is hash tabs. So we're only saying that we're going to replace the tabs. So we also need a way of refreshing something somewhere else on the page. For that, we're using at the very bottom, we're using AJAX swap -OOB, which stands for out of bound. Now, this is in the HTML that is sent back from the backend to htmx. So this actually goes the wrong way around. And if this doesn't quite make sense, just remember if you need to refresh more than one thing on the page, look for out of bound. But what happens is in the HTML that comes back, in there it will say AJAX swap out of bound, and any element that has got out of bound in there, it will take that off the incoming HTML, and it will look for the elements that are already on the page, and it will replace those. So you can now have multiple IDs that replace multiple things on the page. Right, I am going to skip over a couple of slides and a few more. So I'm covering more htmx tags, but just to kind of keep things moving and to save a bit of time. I have kept them in the talk, though. I did this talk before, and I had a lot more, but I changed the order a bit. So you can download the slides and go through them for more examples. So for now, I'm going to skip them. If I've got loads of time, then I might come back to it. Don't think so. Okay, so, right. Next one, then. So when deleting something, you already see me do that. It asks for confirmation. It may have been a mistake. Maybe someone accidentally clicked on delete. So it's very easy in htmx. You just say AJAX confirm, and then you put in some string to ask for confirmation. If the user says no, or whatever the message is, I think it says cancel. If the user clicks on cancel, then there won't be a request to the server, nothing will happen. So this happens before htmx does anything else. Right, those were a few practical examples of htmx's functionality. If you go to the official htmx website, htmx.org, there are a lot more examples and a lot of things I couldn't cover. And yeah, so if you want to see more, have a look. But I wanted to say a few more things just to help you get started with htmx and look at how to integrate it into your website. So, here's one of the things that becomes very quickly, I find, when you start using htmx proper. It's very common to show something when the page is loaded, like the graph on the left, that's the default date period. But then in response to user action, you will send back something that's almost the same graph but with a different range, or a list of dinosaurs but for a different period. So, which means you'll have one view for the main page, the page, and you've got another view that responds to the htmx request. So there's two views creating a chart. So the view for the whole page creates the initial chart, the view which responds to the htmx request creates a different chart. Don't just copy the code. As you probably know, but I'll just remind you, copying code is generally bad practice. When I teach Python, I put a lot of emphasis on clean code, and avoiding duplicate is high on my list. Instead, create a template for the chart and use something like Django or Jinja, include tag to include it when needed. With htmx, you can end up with a lot of these smaller template partials or snippets. Put them in a separate folder so you don't get confused with your normal whole page HTML. Okay, quickly a few Django-specific things. To handle Django's built-in CSRF, cross-site request forgery protection, you need to include the CSRF token for every request. The easiest way to do it is just to put in a standard header, just as I did there. And then everything else will just kind of magically work for you. Okay. There's also Django extension for htmx. The demo doesn't use it because htmx is very straightforward to use anyway. But if you are going to use htmx a lot, worth checking out. There's a Flask extension. Makes it easy to return partial HTML. It can help your Python code to interact. And there's also Jinja extension. Okay, I'm running out of time. Right, okay, here we go. In short, htmx lets you do many great things in the browser without writing JavaScript. It is simple to integrate and simple to use. Thanks for listening. Go to bettapythoncode.com, htmx page, for Flask and Django code and these slides. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll see you tonight for a board game or two.